I would like to talk about P.G. Hall. A little background. I first came across the Hall name when I was researching my own family in the local newspapers. My grandmother's cousin married here in Monrovia in 1889 in the First Baptist Church. They had either an evening meal for their close friends or maybe an early morning breakfast. Anyway, they honeymooned in 1889 at the newly built Hotel del Coronado. And then it mentioned that upon their return, they would occupy the Hall cottage on North JIC. JIC now being, of course, Alta Vista. Now, at that time, I had no idea what the cottage was. Later on, I think I was reading Myron Hotchkiss's excerpts from the local newspaper, and Myron copied an account in the newspaper late in 1887 of those houses that had been built during that year, and sure enough, here was a cottage for P.G. Hall. Construction cost, I believe, $3,500, which would have made it an upper middle-sized house. Finally determined that the Hall cottage was in fact located at the current address of 232 North Alta Vista, the residence of one Sandy Burrid and Larry Remingler. The other thing I came across was an early account of a very tragic accident on Myrtle Avenue in Monrovia. P.G. Hall and his wife and their little son Homer were driving northbound on Myrtle Avenue, probably about the 500 block. Construction was going on in the 400 block, the next block up, and there was a horse tied to a hitching post in front of a construction site. The newspaper account mentioned that one of the carpenters moved a ladder from one location to the next of the building that was under construction, and in the process of doing that, spooked the horse, who reared up, pulled the redwood post to which he had been tied loose, and then started out at a gallop down Myrtle Avenue, heading towards the Halls and their carriage. The account mentioned that Professor Hall turned his own horse to one side, trying to avoid the horse, and while he avoided a direct collision with the horse, the redwood post that the horse had uprooted became airborne and struck little Homer in the skull, causing at least one skull fracture. They took little Homer into the Monrovia Hotel, which was in that block, of the 500 block on the east side, summoned either one or two doctors who looked at little Homer, examined the injuries, and determined that he probably was not going to survive them. And sure enough, shortly thereafter, Homer died, probably from a brain concussion. This is before Live Oak Cemetery had been placed in service. The Monroe family, hearing of the Hall family loss, and knowing that there was nowhere close to bury little Homer, came forward and volunteered for the Halls the use of the grounds at the Oaks as a burial place for little Homer if they so desired. The Halls accepted the gracious offer, and so little Homer's first resting place was the grounds of the Oaks. Later on, after Live Oak was established, the remains were disinterred and reinterred at Live Oak Cemetery, as were the remains of P.G. Hall, who died the following year, 1888. Also buried in the same plot is P.G. Hall's daughter, Helen, from his first marriage. That was about as much as I knew until Sandy Burrid happened on the scene and decided that she wanted to know more about the first owner and resident of her house. So she got busy together, aided with Jan Pack, and they unearthed a lot of really interesting information. They were able to determine why it was that P.G. Hall came to Monrovia in the first place. I'd never known. I thought maybe he came here for his health. and perhaps he did, but he was related by marriage to the Chess family, and undoubtedly that's why he left either Michigan or the Chicago area and came directly to Southern California and Monrovia. We talked about William Albert Chess already. His mother was Sophronia Gregg. She had a sister, Amy, and Amy was first married to Pleasant Hull. They had 2 sons from that marriage, one of them being Phineas, and again, Sandy was able to determine that his given name was Phineas. The newspaper accounts and the biographical sketch on Little Homer and the newspaper account of the houses built only used initials. That was traditional at that time, initials rather than a first name. So his name was Phineas G. Hull. After William Chess's first wife, Sophronia, passed away, he married her sister Amy, who had been married to Pleasant Hull. So it was a second marriage for each, but that was the association and the link that brought the Hull family to Monrovia. Amy and Sophronia were daughters of a physician, Dr. Phineas Gregg, of Brownsville, Michigan. He was a practitioner of the eclectic system of medicine and a Quaker. You know now where Phineas's name came from. And the G might, I don't know for sure, maybe Sandy does, that G in P.G. Hull's name may well have been Gregg for his mother's maiden name and his grandfather. She's nodding her head, is that correct? So he was Phineas, full name Phineas Gregg Hull.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
He was a musician and a composer. He published a number of popular songs as well as a cantata, Jephthah and His Daughter. One of his lighter compositions was The Old Red Mill. It was either Sandy or Jan Pack who discovered that these are archived in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. It's a long way from Monrovia, California, but there they are for anyone who'd like to look them up. The other thing that Sandy was able to do was to find the given name of Phineas Hull's second wife. She was referred to in the newspapers as Mrs. P.G. Hull, but her actual name was Charlotte or Lottie Jackson, and she was a singer. She was the lead soprano in the choir of the Baptist Church in Monrovia and was called on a number of times in the early days to provide a solo for a public gathering.
Steve, that was actually a find of Jan's. Jan's the one that figured that out.
Okay. Anyway, it was a great addition to the story because it clarified exactly who the second Mrs. Hull was. The Hulls tried, I believe, Portland, Oregon briefly, thinking it might benefit P.G. Hull's health. Apparently it was to no avail, and they returned to Monrovia, where P.G. Hull died in 1888. How about the formerly elusive Lottie? Well, she returned to the Chicago area, or Chicago itself, where she married Ernest Robert Graham, a high-profile architect who designed landmark buildings in Chicago and elsewhere. And should you doubt his pedigree as a high-profile architect, a number of his designs were researched and identified. So yes, this was no slouch in the architectural field. He was a first-rate architect. I believe some of what he designed and built is probably still in existence. Yeah. As an interesting sidebar, Sandy, a mistress of understatement, said apparently Ernest was quite a busy man. Well, yes, he was busy. He had a wife. He had a mistress. Apparently, keeping 2 women company at the same time was not a problem, because while he was married to Lottie and another wife, according to Sandy, he carried on a years-long, and I quote, violent love affair, unquote, with a Mrs. Alma Newton Anderson, who sued him in 1934 for negging on his agreement to pay her $300 a month for 17 years. That would seem like, what, about 300, 3,600. Would sound like maybe 5,000 something. He'd already paid her, according to this newspaper article located by Sandy, or Jan, $100,000. This was a mistress who came with a rather high price tag. So while P.G. Hull died in Monrovia, and little Homer did, his wife, widow, left Monrovia for much broader horizons in Chicago, Illinois, and a little bit of early 20th century, shall we say, marital latitude. Anything I might have missed, Sandy? I just want to say it's a great house. It was primarily a single-story house, although there were several rooms on the second floor. Had a wonderful wraparound veranda. There's a great picture of the house in an 1892 panoramic picture of Monrovia, showing the house not surrounded by any other structures, as it was originally. About, I'm guessing maybe 1905, 1906, the house changed hands yet again, and several structural changes were made. The original simple porch posts were replaced with wonderful Greek columns. The porch structure itself was rebuilt in concrete, so there are pedestals in concrete. The surface is now concrete. Those pedestals are the basis for the Greek columns. They left the original porch soffit, but reworked the rest of the porch structure. The house that originally had V-rustic siding on it was covered with shingles and a craftsman motif. Several other more minor additions were made. So the house was updated to what the prevailing style of architecture was, although those Greek columns are not less necessarily craftsman inspired, but they certainly added a very nice touch to the overall architecture. A subsequent owner expanded the second floor and created a master bedroom suite in the front of the house upstairs. Did some more remodeling down on the first floor, but essentially the house, with the exception of that second floor master bedroom suite, is basically as it was constructed in 1887. It had several chimneys originally. One of those did not survive. It might have been lost in the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. The 1892 picture shows the fireplace that was originally in the parlor. I believe there are some ghosts on one wall that would indicate where the mantel of that fireplace was. The front parlor has windows on three sides, allowing for a great deal of light. It was a very light, very spacious room. The rooms behind it also have windows giving plenty of access. So combined with the large size of the rooms, the high ceilings, and a lot of window space, it would have been a very comfortable and very light house to occupy at a time when some Victorians were a little on the darker side. Sandy was able to find a fragment of stained glass in the basement, another bit of sleuthing. I think it's safe to say that that fragment might have been either in a window or the original entry door. And I took a look at the door in the kitchen that now leads out to the back porch. And I said, Sandy, I think that was originally either one of your two front doors, because it's definitely Eastlake in style, which matches the other doors in the house. And a kitchen in that era would not have had anything as elaborate as an Eastlake door. So apparently in the 1906 or 7 renovation, they installed doors that are veneered with quarter sawn oak and recycled the original front door and placed it in the kitchen. Anyway, house with an interesting history, interesting associations. It is now identified as one of Monrovia's first houses, and it is landmarked. Not landmarked, should be landmarked. Owner would like it landmarked. End of story, to be continued. Two afterthoughts about P.G. Hull and the P.G. Hull cottage. The original downstairs doors, which are solid redwood, were created in the Eastlake style, which is a more highly ornamented style. Typical of the Victorians, they put their best foot forward, but doors in the other part of the house are the simpler 2/2 panel design that would have been less expensive, still served the same purpose, but didn't require the same intricacy of workmanship that those Eastlake doors do. The house that I moved, the Luther Blair house, same thing. The principal rooms have Eastlake style doors, the kitchen, the bedrooms upstairs, all with the simpler doors. And redwood was the wood of choice used for interior woodwork, door and window casings and doors, and also used on the exterior of the house with the V rustic siding and all the door and window trim, all done from clear, all hard redwood, which if properly painted lasts indefinitely. And the other thought about the Hall family and the Chess family's origins in Calvin, Michigan. My great-grandmother's family was living in Calvin, Michigan at the same time. I've often wondered, did they know each other? Could be, maybe yes, maybe no. But they ended up in Southern California. The Chess and Hall families in Monrovia, and my great-grandmother's family in Pasadena.
What was their name?
Henderson. That was my great-grandmother's maiden name. She married into the Lisk family, but she lived in Calvin, and her older brother and some of his family lived in Calvin as well, starting about somewhere between 1850 and 1860. Same time frame as the other families. Who knows?